I don't think Mercedes are going to get out of their little funk of theirs. And I think it's got something to do with the Lewis Hamilton-Ferrari deal. Yeah, because of how early the news broke and the fallout that has resulted. Look, I'll try to be fair here, honest. Of course, I get it. It wasn't the best day to ask that question regarding his opinion of Ferrari's performance in relation to Mercedes. May I clarify something? But a lot of media outlets out there are saying that that question posed to Lewis, which caused him to walk out, was something to do with mentioning jealousy or something like that, saying, "Oh, are you jealous of Ferrari, Lewis?" Well, if you actually read the question itself, it's nowhere near as loaded as that. I just think it was just badly timed. Just wait for the right moment to ask this question. But anyway, here it is, and I won't bother with it. It's not worth it. It's, are you looking forward to being with them, that being Ferrari, because they're faster? And then, of course, Lewis retorts with, do you have any better questions? Before the reporter apologizes, but before he can fix the damage, Lewis is already gone. In not too dissimilar fashion to when Lance Stroll walked away from reporters after being asked about what happened in qualifying and then him shoving his personal trainer in Qatar, where he was just giving monosyllabic answers and then he capped it off with, keep driving, and then walked off. Walking out of an interview, it's a bit of a mixed bag, when it comes to the response from the media, including certain wildly coiffured laddermen such as myself. Yes, I'll get a haircut soon. Sure, walking out of an interview that you're not happy with is a clear sign of trying to control the situation. The team that you are going to pulled off their one-stop gamble, whereas your team didn't. The one-stop plan had legs, but Mercedes just stumbled over theirs. But at the same time, the media should have really been aware of Lewis Hamilton's mood when asking that question. He clearly looked miserable and not in the mood to be asked such things about his future career. I think he just wanted to answer a couple of questions just to say that he'd done that, he fulfills contractual obligations because all of the drivers have to be in the media pen, and then he can go off and just decompress. Maybe the media should have just brought it back a little bit, maybe not ask such hard-hitting questions or questions about his future, and instead talk more about the stuff that he's into, or about Top Gun Maverick, where apparently he had the opportunity to be in that movie, but he turned it down, and he's now regretting it, or maybe talk about the film that he's making with Brad Pitt. Just more light-hearted questions just to cheer Lewis up a little bit, talk more about himself, and then you can maybe ask questions such as that. Trust me, I've compared quite a few conventions, and getting celebrities and guests to talk about themselves, it's always a big hit. But at the same time, the media is there to ask tough questions, as well as to ask questions your colleagues haven't thought of to try and engage your interviewee. They also want to get the credit for asking that question, and then getting a fantastic response. Or in the case of whoever asked this question, getting the person that they asked it to walk away, and now we're talking about it. So in a way, I guess that question worked? I bet at the time Lewis didn't really think much of it because he was already in a bad mood, and in the media pen, you're drifting from one area to the other, so he probably just thought, well, there aren't any more questions here, I'm just going to go and walk over there and answer some more questions, or if I'm done, I'm just going to go back to my trailer or my room to just go and chill out before I can then go back to my hotel. However, the context of what had just happened and what Ferrari were able to do kind of makes the situation all the more complicated and all the more awkward. And the question itself, whilst really badly timed, speaks volumes. I think you should realize by now, Lewis, that questions like these, they're not going to stop. Unless there's some kind of instruction sent from on high from either Lewis Hamilton's entourage, Mercedes, Ferrari, or even Formula One itself, for the media to no longer ask Lewis Hamilton about questions related to Ferrari and his future contract with them, to mainly focus on 2024 and Mercedes, because there's a 2024 season and Formula One's going like, we've got a season here, we don't make it irrelevant. And therefore, yes, you can easily put a bandage over the problem, but it's only going to make the media all the more curious and probably all the more infuriated. They're going to find roundabout ways to ask the same question, which will only antagonize Lewis even more and probably cause him to snap back even more aggressively and overtly, instead of just going, okay, I'm done with this, I'm just going to go over there. And in the media, it's just going to cast a negative light on him. And again, the question itself wasn't terrible. It was just badly timed. And again, I understand why Lewis wasn't in a good mood that day. That Mercedes car felt the best that it had all year in those sessions, that maybe he might have had a chance after all at getting a decent points finish or even having a run at the podium. Perhaps bring the W15 just that little bit closer to McLaren and definitely build a gap away from Aston Martin. Even if Lewis Hamilton didn't end up with a podium, at least being in contention for one would have made Lewis Hamilton feel a little bit more optimistic, or at least a little bit more cheery, that at least he had the chance to be competitive. Sadly though, the weather conspired against them because, once again, the practice and qualifying sessions were done when track temperatures and air temperatures were a lot cooler. and it's becoming clearer that the W15 works the best in cooler climes. And then on race day, it turns out to be 3 degrees warmer than anticipated, and thusly, that made a huge impact on car performance, and that means that one-stop strategy was a little bit of a fluctuating mixed bag. Those warmer temperatures affected the rear end of the car, and that's the area where Lewis finds it the most crucial to find grip. He was asking his team to change it on the fly. He was on the radio going, change this strategy. He couldn't turn the car, which then resulted in him just relenting and letting George Russell through, who was once again able to get more out of the current iteration of the W15, which supposedly had a lot of feedback from Lewis Hamilton in terms of designing the car and this brand new concept, the third concept that Mercedes has had in as many years. They then look over to Ferrari and look at Charles Leclerc. They did a one-stop strategy, and Charles was able to climb from 8th place to 4th, and thusly cementing 2nd place for Ferrari in the constructors, and meaning they've now got a solid foundation to maybe try and go after Red Bull, or at least just consolidate that position and not have to worry about McLaren. It also made Charles' weekend far less gloomy. I can understand why he might have still been a little bit miserable, because had he qualified at a slightly higher position, maybe 5th place or so, he might have been actually in 2nd place on the road, ahead of Checo. That meant another race where his outgoing teammate did better in terms of results. And now he and Fred are getting more and more questions about his own performance, Charles's, but more about that later, especially in relation to Carlos. In the midst of all that frustration, missed opportunities, and Ferrari proving to be transforming themselves into a team that can pull off pit strategies almost as effectively as back in the Ross Brawn days, Lewis is probably not in a good place right now. And this begs the question, why did that transfer news break then? Who broke it, and what good would it do Lewis's psyche? Because quite clearly, it's not doing Lewis any good. And going to Ferrari was supposed to do him the world of good. A change is as good as a rest, they say. But right now, with all of these questions and constant harassment about, oh, Ferrari are looking good, and oh, why is Mercedes not doing that good? Oh, you're not getting that much out of the car. It's just proving to be an utter nightmare for Lewis that could lead this to being one of the biggest clangers in Ferrari's history, or one of Ferrari's biggest coups this side of signing Michael Schumacher in 1996. Some sources say that it was Toto Wolff who broke the news of the Ferrari deal earlier than they would have liked, after having heard of this change in development just 24 hours prior. After all of the rhetoric that Lewis had pledged his loyalty to the team, and that he said he would be a Mercedes driver until the day he died. But remember, Lewis said the same thing at McLaren, and he also said that loyalty had its limits, and clearly he met his limits at McLaren, and now he's met his limits at Mercedes. Those limits are being really tested this year, especially when you look at the driver's standings, and Lewis has barely broken into double figures in the driver's standings, whereas George is quite a ways ahead, and Lewis has only just overtaken Lance Stroll in the standings. Could Toto Wolff have broken this news in a fit of pique, that his long-term relationship with Lewis Hamilton was coming to an end, that decade of loyalty was then proving all for naught, that he was abandoning them right after the Mercedes board rejected Lewis Hamilton's more lucrative and bigger contract? Perhaps, but we've also got to add a pinch of salt here, because the source that was claiming that Toto Wolff leaked the news comes from a driver who used to drive for guess who. Ivan Capelli broke the news to Gazzetta dello Sport. According to Capelli, this news was meant to be announced later on in the year, where probably Ferrari would have been the ones to dictate the pace of the narrative. I'm guessing probably announcing something of the likes of Monza right in front of the Tifosi, that the driver that denied them so many wins with Vettel and Leclerc and other drivers was now going to be driving for them, or they could have waited just a little bit longer and announced it at Imola. Instead, the news broke just 24 hours after Toto found out the news, and newscasters in Britain were broadcasting from Brackley for hours, and you constantly saw this procession of Mercedes-clad staff members walking into the building to be informed by Toto that this news was true. It looked like a funeral march. It looked so dour and depressing, and oh my goodness, Wolff in theory could portray himself as the betrayed lover who Lewis had cheated on, going to Ferrari for a much better prospect, a much better car, a bigger deal, a chance for more investment for all of the projects that he works on outside of Formula One. And finally capping off all of the rumours that have been circling around Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari for about a decade now, and then proving that to be real. Now it's finally happened, and Mercedes can look like the victims. But in reality, Lewis is the victim out of all of this, because he is now going to be facing so many questions about Ferrari. He's going to be constantly reminded about them and how good they are and how his team currently aren't. And that's only going to change when he can break out finally his English to Italian dictionary and he can finally wear red. In reality, Toto probably didn't leak the news, but one thing is for sure, Mercedes responded very quickly. They called everybody to Brackley, they were all gathering, the media was right there, and they were able to construct a narrative of everybody walking in to then find out the news that it turned out to be the case, that people were going to be hearing some really, really bad news, that the driver that had brought them so much glory was going to be leaving them. In front of the cameras, yeah, Mercedes exacerbated this and dictated the pace of that story on their terms, and Ferrari had to play catch up. So one thing's for sure, in this situation, Mercedes shot first. But what I reckon the main consequence of this will be is that Lewis Hamilton will be suffering all of these questions for the entirety of this season, especially if the W15 doesn't get its act together and George proves to be the only driver out of the two who can get anything decent out of it. Which is seemingly happening right now, since George has more points than Lewis, save for the dirty air fracas with Fernando Alonso in Melbourne, of course. And another reason why Lewis will be suffering this year, and why he'll probably be really, really depressed and dour and miserable, is because his boss, once again, is being miserable. I thought Toto had turned a corner, that he had changed his mindset, that he was going to be more circumspect and understanding, pragmatic about Mercedes having to rebuild themselves. But then he goes and undoes all of it by saying he wanted to punch himself on the nose after Melbourne and their double DNF. And then he basically says, oh, Mercedes are in no man's land now, and that Max Verstappen has just pretty much won his 4th world title, and that Mercedes has practically given up. And you really don't need to hear that, especially in your final season with that team. Lewis, seeing all of that, Toto, his boss, just basically saying, yeah, there's no point actually competing. That Max has won his 4th world title this year, and there's no point in competing. Yeah, we're in no man's land right now. And this all goes into connection with what Max Verstappen said in a press conference before the Japanese Grand Prix. And it was very, very cheeky, and it was a bit anarchic as well, saying that, oh, Toto's been saying really nice things about me lately. And I can't imagine why. With all the rumours about who's going to be piloting with George Russell, Max Verstappen being connected to it, but then he denies it. No one's really sure, but I think Max is enjoying all of the speculation and teasing everyone. This is supposed to be Lewis Hamilton's swan song year with Mercedes. Sure, the car may not be great right now, but what you don't need is a boatload of negativity and pessimism from Toto. Yes, Toto was able to bring so much glory to Mercedes, but right now, he's not really bringing much to the table. George is able to tune all of that out, and now he's turning out to be a 40s drill sergeant by going, righto chaps, come on, we gotta do the best we can, righto, yeah, we're doing really well, come on. And Lewis is just going, the car's okay, I guess, and yeah, you can tell Lewis is being affected by all of this pessimism. And thusly, he wouldn't want to be reminded why his Mercedes car isn't as quick as a Ferrari, where just a few years ago, the press would be asking Vettel why his Ferrari car wasn't as quick as a Mercedes. Mercedes right now, they're a lovely little ray of sunshine. I thought they changed their tune, but no, they're still playing the tune of constant woe. And this just reminds me all the more why we have silly season when we have it. By the time you get to the summer and September, the momentum from the season's coming to an end, people are starting to speculate on the brand new year, and drivers are thinking about their careers and where they might like to be. Naturally, speculation about the following season is going to generate, and therefore it doesn't really come as much of a shock. People are expecting it, whereas if you do this right before the season starts, it's going to take momentum away from the season. Sort of like what we had with Vettel and Ricciardo, that they were moving teams, or they were leaving a team that they had been with for many years. And granted, the reason why it didn't affect us so badly is because 2020, that was a weird season in of itself, but right now, in 2024, we don't have that weirdness and surrealness to distract ourselves from. Because of this news, everybody's looking to 2025 and when Lewis rocks a Ferrari shirt for the first time and drives a car of theirs. You know he's going to be wheeled out one day driving an F2004, a 7-time world champion driving the car which gave Michael Schumacher his 7th world championship. Everybody is naturally going to want to know if Lewis is excited to be driving the car since they are looking like they're in a good place. And Fred Vasseurs' stewardship is looking all the more impressive and is getting them big results, especially in the pit stop strategy department. And with Mercedes, I don't want to say they're floundering. Okay, they are kind of floundering. Especially with a team boss who is exuding pessimism whilst eating some pumpernickel. #pumperism. After 2 months of these questions and 4 races where his swan song Mercedes is proving to be trickier than expected, Lewis has probably had enough of being asked about Ferrari, and that's why he walked out. He's reached the end of his tether. But I've got some bad news for you, Lewis. It's not going to stop. It's only going to get worse thanks to one certain driver, Carlos Sainz, the one you're replacing. Had Carlos Sainz not been in a hospital bed for the Saudi Grand Prix, he might be second place in the championship right now. By a point to Checo, yes, but still ahead of Leclerc. again. With every single race Carlos Sainz gets a decent result, or he bags a podium, or he bags a second place, or even gets a win, and continues on the trend that he is the only non-Red Bull driver to win in Formula 1 right now, there are going to be more and more questions generated as to why are Ferrari getting rid of this guy who is clearly doing the business? Why did Ferrari's chairman just drop effectively $500 million in cash to Lewis Hamilton to secure his services when they got a perfectly good driver? Why would they need to change that lineup? Because, in my opinion, I think the Ferrari lineup is the most solid on the grid. They seem the most unproblematic. I've never really seen Carlos or Charles fight. Have you? The court of public opinion has taken a look at Carlos Sainz and deemed him the victim out of all of this. And with the performances that he's pumping out, he's just justifying and exacerbating the feelings of the court. And thusly, it's taking away more and more luster away from the general idea of Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari. 2 months ago, the idea of Lewis going to Ferrari was amazing. It was incredible. It was the biggest coup in Formula 1 history since Michael Schumacher joined the Scuderia. It was so unexpected. There was no questions about it. It was looking like a banger of a move. Fast forward to now, there are more and more people by the day going, wait a minute. Of course, the former has a car which is working for him and the latter simply doesn't right now. And Carlos is currently able to counter Charles with little issue, whereas Lewis is all over the place. Unable to translate practice pace to the race, whereas his teammate is able to do slightly better. Albeit with some mistakes along the way, which is why I will refer to George's performance this year as him effectively falling up the stairs. So questions about Lewis and Ferrari, they're not going to go away. They're just going to become more and more frequent, as Ferrari impress and Mercedes don't. The only way I can see them going away, or just dissipating, is the W15 suddenly becoming really good and matching the Ferrari, or maybe besting them on occasion, Lewis bagging a win with Mercedes or getting a decent podium, and him just being the more optimistic and being more cheery. And that's the only way I can see these questions just stopping, or at least minimizing, or Lewis being in the right frame of mind where he can just give a breezy answer, non-committal, quick, move on. All the while he's stuck at the back of the points-paying positions, just looking incredibly miserable with a team, Mercedes, who are looking equally so. Yeah, Mercedes are feeling quite mizzy, aren't they? Hashtag Mercedes. I really hope that Lewis's team don't put restrictions in place which results in the media not being able to ask him questions about Ferrari. That would be not a good look. But at the same time, the media should be very much aware that Lewis is not in the good mood right now, and asking those kind of questions, not the best time to do so. He's just going to get all the more depressed whilst also being compared to Carlos Sainz. Fun. But another driver Carlos could be compared to is Max Verstappen, his former Toro Rosso teammate. Supposing Carlos gets the plum to go to Red Bull, would that work? I think it could be chaos. The good kind of chaos. Something I talk about more of in this video here, you can go and watch right now. It's good.